What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel, and welcome back to the Computer to Cardboard series, where we look at video games and how we can potentially convert them into board games using the digital mechanics that they have present. In the first episode, our last episode, we started looking at Against the Storm, a rogue-like city building, city management sim kind of a game, which I quite like a lot. I've put a lot of hours into this one, and we spent some time doing an analysis. We meditated on what kind of things make Against the Storm good, what kind of things it does uniquely compared to other city builders, and got the ball rolling with some ideas about what a board game could look like using Against the Storm. Now, I've prepared many slides for us to go and look at. Many slides where we can go through and look at what the core things are that we need to have a look at when it comes to building this thing, what kind of things we're going to need to be turning into components in building an Against the Storm board game. So let's get started. Let's have a look at our first slide, which is the list of species and needs. So these are going to be our workers in the worker placement game, but I also think that each player is going to be managing one species. So I could be playing humans, and then player 2 could be beavers, player 3 could be lizards. But we also have harpies, foxes, and frogs. Each of the different races have a different list of needs in order to raise their resolve, which will in turn give you reputation, which is the victory condition metric. And reputation is one of two ways. High species resolve, which gains reputation, is one of the two ways that you gain reputation, which will help you win the game. So let's kind of quickly run through what the different needs are, because it will come up later, because we need to look at how we're going to be making these things to generate that reputation. So first, with humans and everything except frogs, we have the basic shelter need, and then we have a specific house for each species. So how I'm thinking this should work is we have a tile or whatever, which is the basic shelter, and then you can upgrade it to have space for especially humans or especially frogs or whatever. However, frogs which cannot use regular shelter must require only the upgraded ones. I'm still yet to figure out exactly how I want to do managing population in Against the Storm. Normally, they will always show up at year start, so after the storm ends is roughly, and then they'll come up, and then a caravan of them will join you, and you get a whole bunch of people joining at once. So there will be time when they are unhoused, and you want to build housing for them so that they can not receive that penalty to resolve, right? So first thing is housing. We need to figure out how we're going to be building housing for them. Second thing is complex food needs. This was one in the first episode where I was like, do we want to waive this all as just food and be like a feed your workers thing? And I think that might actually take away from one of the things that this game makes unique. It has 7 or 8 unique different foods and lots of buildings that make different unique foods to try and make these people happy. And so I think that it's important to perhaps look into this, and also how they overlap uniquely is going to give the different players different specific objectives. For example, if I'm the human player and my teammate is playing as beavers, we can make just biscuits to make both of us happy. Similarly, we can find that overlap, and then there's some soft synergy there, right? However, if I am humans and my teammate is playing as harpies, we have no complex food overlaps, and we might have to, go a bit wider when it comes to food construction buildings and committing to creating our complex foods. And so that's, I think, a great place to start in determining what buildings and stuff we're going to need, which we'll get to in a minute. But then the next category is clothing needs. Now, the DLC added boots. I think it's just coats in the base game. But it's added most obviously, like you have one or the other, with the exception of harpies, which want both coats and boots. And so there will be, again, we have to pick out buildings that are going to be able to make coats or boots or both or whatever. And then the last one, which I think is the more complicated one, is services needs. Now there is 6. I think there's 6 different options: leisure, religion, education, luxury, brawling. Sorry, 7. Treatment. Now, of these services buildings, each of them only provide 2 of the 7. And so we need a couple options to be able to meet them all. And so using this as a guide, I've selected buildings that are going to just, at the base, start with meeting these needs. And the way that the game works is actually many more buildings, because there's ones that do a good job of a specific thing. So like, I'm really good at making pie. I'm not great at making some other things, but like pie is my specialty. And there'll be other buildings that were like, I'm not great at making pie, but I can do it. But I'm really good at this other thing. And so you're like, well, I don't really need that much pie, or I'm not interested in pie at all. I'm more interested in a specialist thing, and that's how you're going to choose between them. I don't know if we want to carry over that same thing as much, because I don't know how heavy into resource management we want to go. Because the heavier into resource management we go, is like way more ways of tracking how much you have or something. So much more mental upkeep when it comes to managing what's happening in the game, and it adds huge complexity to the game. So we're probably going to try and find a way to simplify this a little bit. But understanding that this is kind of the basis or a start for what we need to do to get worker resolve, which is going to get us towards our win condition. Let's have a look at what's next. So we're going to get started with some of the buildings. Now, these are all buildings of a specific type that harvest a resource from the land, the place where you've settled. So fishing hut, you can actually see on the screen, on the screenshot that I have, there's that bright glowing green pond. That is a spot where the fishing hut can go and get fish, algae, stuff like that, right? Trapper's camp will get you meats and insects from specific nodes, and all these all harvest from specific nodes. Herbalist camp, which is herbs and berries. Woodcutter's camp, which gets wood. Harvester's camp, which gets plant fiber and reeds. Stonecutter's camp, which gets clay and stone. And Forager's camp, which gets food, I think. Again, this is all off the top of my head. My notes are much more specific and detailed. I am just reading from the slide right now. But I think that in the beginning of a settlement, when you start out, these are the buildings that you're going to be building immediately to start gaining the natural resources. And for example, like the woodcutter's one is like really essential because you need wood and planks to build all your other buildings after these ones. So starting with this and having basic food needs met, for example, and then those ingredients then become complex foods later on. So for example, Trapper's camp might harvest a downed creature for meat, and then you have meat as a resource. And then you might take meat to the grill, a building which makes recipes, and make skewers, something that is enjoyed by lizards. And skewers is basically meat plus vegetable. And then now you have a complex food that you've turned previous resources into, and instead of the worker not starving to death, they're having a good time, which I think is kind of the idea. So I think these are all at the basis how to get the core materials that you need to be upgrading things. So these are an easy include when it comes to list of buildings. And then next we have some more things. Now these were the buildings that I picked out to, at the bare minimum, hit every food need. Now, as you can see, as much as possible, they don't overlap, with the exception of Cookhouse here at the bottom, which overlaps on biscuits and skewers, but it was the only one that had porridge. I had other options of picking different ones, like Field Kitchen has porridge. But I feel like it's okay to have just a good one, a good building, right? Whereas the Cookhouse specifically, biscuits, skewers, and porridge doesn't super overlap with a lot of the different like one race. It's not just lizards will be happy. It does a little bit for a lot of different species. So I think it's the better, the more helpful one. Also not included is ale, because wine and ale are not complex food needs. Wine is for luxury, and ale is for leisure, which is the service needs, not food needs. So there was also potentially an option to have something that was pickled goods, which is what the seller has, and porridge instead. But this is kind of what I picked for now. And again, when it comes to building something like this, a lot of the time you will have something that doesn't work and then playtest it and then see the vision and go, well, actually, it should have been this whole time. Because some of this stuff just might change between now in concept to prototype, which we'll get to a little bit later. The other two things is the rain catcher and the water extractor. The rain catcher receives rain based on what season it is for the 3 different seasons, which you can see there, green, yellow, and blue, which is drizzle, clearance, and storm. And then the water extractor is placed on a geyser of a particular type and will always make that one water type. And so certain things will require certain water types, but for the most part, we're just looking at porridge and tea, which require water and any kind. So I haven't thought about exactly how we want to do the different water types. There's something else that the game does where you install storm engines by using pipes into the different manufacturing buildings, and then that will add bonuses to the people that are placed there, which is something that we can do. And then each of those different buildings requires a specific type of water to make it fit. So I think that's probably along the lines of what might happen. Again, we have to keep in mind exactly how complex we want the game to become. All right, looking at what's next, we have the different shelters. So like I mentioned before, we will have the big shelter, which will fit everyone except for our friends, the frogs here at the bottom. Now, each of the species has their own specific house, and kind of what I envisioned was that this would be managed by a tile, and the big shelter is like a double-spaced tile, and all of the species-specific houses are single-spaced tiles that go on top of a big shelter as like an upgrade to it, where you have the big shelter where people are housed and they're not, on the street. But then you have the upgrade, where you have it's like half, right? So you could have half human house, half beaver house. The big shelter holds 6, and then the human half holds 3, and then the beaver half holds 3, and they both sit on top. And then the people in there with the complex housing needs are happy. The exception is the frog, because it has the most unique requirements to live in. The frog cannot be put in a big shelter, can only be put into advanced housing, and that will have a more expensive resource cost to build. I think it's just bricks normally, but it houses less frogs. You can't put them in a big shelter and upgrade later. You have to put them into the special house straight away. So this is things to consider. I don't know how complicated this part really needs to be. And then if it's tiles, how are we spatially organizing this? Do we actually need physical space to fit on the thing? How is that going to fit with the board and where everything is, and resource nodes and all the other manufactorial buildings and everything? It's looking to be a very, very big. But I think this part is relatively simple for it, and we can squish up space a little bit by stacking the tiles on top of each other, which I think is not a bad idea. Next is the service buildings. Now, there's actually many more service buildings than these 3, but I picked these 3 because it will meet as many of the service needs as required, really. Up the top, we have the tavern, which gets luxury and leisure. Luxury on the left is wine, leisure on the right is ale. Next, we have the temple, which has education and religion. Education on the left with scrolls, and religion on the right with incense. And then at the bottom, we have the clan hall, or the guild hall, I can't remember which doesn't normally have treatment. There was no nice overlap for this one, so I'm just kind of hand waving a little bit and saying, sure, there's treatment here. And brawling which you need tea and you need training gear for. So again, starting to concatenate things a little bit and not taking the game one-to-one and putting it in, finding a way to shrink the number of required buildings a little bit. And then this is what we're literally looking at right now. This is the full list of buildings that we need to have tiles for in the game. Now you can see at the top we have all the camps, fishing hut, the rain collectors, and then we have our farms, so small farm, herb garden, plantation, all require the specific fertile soil. And then we have underneath that is all of the food places, so bakery, cookhouse, grill, cellar, apothecary, tavern, temple, explorer's lodge, and the tavern is the service needs. And then now we're looking at some of the more complex buildings, the makeshift post, rain mill, cooperage, provisioner, mine, distillery, leather worker, druid's hut, tinkerer, lumber mill, weaver, brickyard, workshop, crude workstation. Now those last couple ones, lumber mill, weaver, brickyard, are all about turning the basic resources into advanced resources. So turning stone into bricks, turning wood into planks, turning plant fiber into fabric. And then workshop does the same thing, and so does the crude workstation. Now the crude workstation makes all three and is shit. The workshop makes all three and is average. The lumber mill does wood really well, and same for weaver and brickyard for their respective ones. And so their inclusion is just going to be entirely about, do we want to have that same specialization thing where it's like, okay, I can make bricks but it's not great, or I can make bricks and it is great, and that's now I've traded off selecting that blueprint. I'm not sure yet, but I think this is a good minimum number of buildings, because I don't want to go full one-to-one, and so I might actually be cutting from this list as best I can to try and make the game smaller, make the game not gigantic as it's currently looking to be. And so all of the stuff previously is about building the resolve of the workers and building towards reputation, which is the win condition. Now the other way to get reputation and win condition is completing orders, and I spent some time thinking about how orders should work, because I think that orders kind of sets a more short-term goal, whereas your workers resolve is something that you slowly build to over time. Like you have a long list of things that you're trying to tick off slowly, and you go, well, I can't do some of these things, I don't have the abilities for this yet, I'm going to just work on this one or whatever. I want them to not leave or hate me. And then you get the orders in, and some will come up where you have options of picking really easy short-term ones, but a lot of them will, take a little while. So I'm thinking the easiest way to do this is a deck of cards. And that deck of cards has the card, and it just has the order written on it, and like maybe picture what the thing is. And basically, when a new order arrives, you will look at the top 3 cards of the deck, and then you'll choose one of those cards. This is pretty similar to how orders actually works in the game, because we'll give you 3 options and you'll pick between them, except the third one is usually a special and more complicated option. I'm not sure if I want to do exactly that, but I do want to make it scale so it does get more difficult over time. I'll talk about that in a second. Orders include a wide range of possible goods. Now, I started to make a list of things that I kind of wanted. So, for example, we want advanced foods. So, advanced foods as orders is good, because either you have the ability to produce it and you can make a surplus and use it to fulfill the order, or you can produce it and you fulfill the order first and then make your workers happy second. Short-term game, long-term goal, right? So I had foods. I also had stuff like boots and coats. A lot of the things you use to make workers happy, you are already going to be making. But in the same way, if we have 2 boots species and the ability to make coats, it doesn't do anything. So having an order that could potentially make, use of the things that your species don't need to be happy, I think is also a good choice. And then the kind of the most obvious one is the packs of materials. So that's where the makeshift post comes in, where you can make packs of building materials, packs of crops, packs of provisions, but also some manufactorial buildings will also be able to make packs of trade goods and packs of luxury goods. This is where you bundle up a bunch of a specific good and it gains more value for that. And then you try and use that to meet orders instead. And I think that should be like the toppest end. So in that way, that the orders should possibly be stacked in segments for complexity. Now that means, if we think about Splendor has tiers 1, 2, and 3, and then like a display is arranged for each of them, and then they're replaced as is completed, right? And then as you're able to afford higher tiered ones, you go up there. I'm thinking something like that, except it's maybe not all displayed at once. In the first, set of orders that you get, you'll be picking from the first tier, and eventually after enough seasons pass, it'll be like, okay, now you have to only pick from the second tier. And then more seasons pass, okay, now you can only pick from the third tier. But they only give you the same amount of reputation. Usually one order completed gives you 1 reputation. You need like 10 or something like that. And you usually get like 12 orders in total, maybe a little bit more than that, to potentially complete. So you could just complete orders and win the game that way, which I think is fine. It's fine to have that thing to focus on if you don't want to, or if you haven't had access to the specific things that you need to make your workers happy enough to get reputation that way. And then the last thing, orders left over time accumulate impatience. I like the idea of you have the current orders, which are your current objectives, sitting out on the table, and then each season that goes by where you haven't completed the order, little cube goes on it, and the little cube pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And at the end of the year, impatience is calculated, and you add that much cubes to how far along the impatience track that you go. And so the longer you leave an order unfulfilled, the more of a problem it becomes for you, because normally impatience just slowly accumulates per second. And then depending on how wrong things are going, that speed is faster or slower. With this, that's kind of hard to communicate. Like, real time is a difficult thing to communicate in a board game, because humans are not very good at experiencing real time unless it is managed for them. Even if you use something like a sand timer, you won't always know specifically when the sand timer has ended until you check, and there's a measure of error there. Using something like a digital clock has a setup and reset time problem and stuff like that. So I think it is just better and less stressful to try and add a system like this, where you're trying to complete the orders in as few seasons as possible. And then the ones that have been there the longest become your higher priority, because you are then able to remove that impatience gain from it and try and juggle them to keep the impatience gain low, which I think really works. And I think that solves that specific mechanic functioning for us. And now there's one last thing, which I have mentioned a few times already in this video. What is going to be complexity creep? What is going to be some of the problems that we encounter when putting this design together? Well, first of all, what are our design goals? I think goal number 1 is to create a game that accurately reflects the Against the Storm experience. That's kind of the point of the video series, right? Where we're trying to take a video game and translate it into a board game, and we're looking at some of the design tenets that come with that. So playing the game has to feel like Against the Storm, and not just feel like it has an Against the Storm theme. It has to mechanically feel similar to playing the game. But big game bad, small game good, which is a thing that I kind of think about a lot. I, first of all, don't want to be designing and playtesting and prototyping a gigantic game. That takes a lot of time, and a lot of it I will have to shortcut for the video series, because me cutting up cardboard and paper for 5 hours isn't going to be engaging content. My watch retention is not going to be worth the investment, right? And so instead, I need to be able to try and create something, take what we've gone through in the slideshow already and simplify it. Maybe some stuff needs to get cut to make a more streamlined experience. Maybe only 3 of the species are available and a lot of the other stuff is cut to make it a bit smaller and a bit more simple. And then you have expansions and stuff that add stuff later. Like if I'm adding frogs from minute 0, do I really have space to improve on stuff later, right? So it would make sense to potentially cut down on things to leave space for things to be added later for just like a generic business game design sense. You see a lot of games that will, have good expansions that will come and add new stuff. Like Wingspan is a great example. It's got expansions for different regions of birds. So in making the very, very first base game, you can't go, well, I want every bird ever, right? There's too many. So you go, I have to pick a specific range of birds to include here, all right? And then all of the expansions indicate a specific region, like there's the Oceania expansion, which is where all the Australian birds are. And whilst, yes, they are really unique and can be someone's favorite, won't show up in the base game because they belong, in a more specific collection. And maybe that is a lens upon which we need to look through this translation of the game to find what is the smallest viable playable version of the game that still meets our design goal of communicating the Against the Storm experience. And I think that's going to be the big challenge. And then here's the big question. What is the true Against the Storm experience, right? Is the true Against the Storm experience that roguelike part of it where you build the whole settlement, you go, cool, I meet all the goals. Oh, the whole thing blows up, whatever, I'm not that invested. I've got these upgrades, I'm now going to the next one, I'm doing it again. And that first 3 minutes of building a settlement, learning what resources you have available to you, what new blueprints you have to try and build different buildings and stuff, it starts again. Is that the true Against the Storm experience? Is that the thing that we need to be communicating? Or is it the harsh conditions that the people are living in, right? The plagues and the storms and people starving to death and dying, and us creating nice shelters for them and creating good food for them to eat and fulfilling their needs for entertainment and religion, so that in the horrible oppressing situation of being in a new settlement where there's no comforts of life, that we can carve out some nice beacon of hope and joy and the little happy things that they remember from where they came to where they are now. Is that the core of the Against the Storm experience? We want to focus on making the workers happy throughout building the settlement, which again is a thing I don't think other civilization builders do. I think they care very little about the workers. They're really disposable. And so it's like, what avenue do we want to focus on that is going to communicate the true Against the Storm experience, and how complex must the game be to achieve this goal? Now, I'm not going to answer this question now. I am going to need time to ponder on this while I put together some stuff for the next episode, where we're going to try and answer some of this question. I'm going to have a more concise brief, because right now I have a long list of buildings, I have a long list of possible orders, and I have a long list of what buildings are required to make what complex foods. And there's like 40 different specific material resources that need to be tracked by the player to make all these things happen. How can I cut this down? How can I make this a much more punchy, playable experience in a smaller game? That's what we're going to try and work towards in the next episode. And then after that, we'll start looking at, Photoshop, making components, and then prototyping later on. But if you have an idea on what you think the true Against the Storm experience is, please let me know in the comments, because that might help guide me towards what we should be making in the future. How small the game should be, how big the game should be. Should we go huge? Should we get absolutely crazy? Let me know. And while you're there typing away, check it out, because on the screen I'm going to have the full playlist for actually maybe get rid of the logo. Let's just put this cool wallpaper up here. The full playlist from Computer to Cardboard, which at the time of recording just has Against the Storm. And once we've completed Against the Storm, we will go and look at other video games and how we can adapt them to board games as well. So if you have a suggestion of a game that you would like for us to look at in the future episodes, please get in the comments and leave that as well. So I read and respond to pretty much every comment, even the ones that tell me to go and touch grass. And it actually does help me a lot in informing what content I should be making in the future and how things are going. So let's chat, let's hang out and talk about what's going on. But above all, in that playlist, you'll have the entire series. If you missed the first episode, you can go and check that out. If this is not the most recent episode, you can go and see what happens next immediately. But I'll always have just like another random video up on the screen because we do a lot of cool different stuff on the channel that's maybe worth checking out. Maybe you'll find a new favorite thing. Maybe you'll check out some of the board games that we play or some of the Let's Play videos that we've done. And as always, the subscribe button, which is the best way to guarantee that you will find out what happens next because the algorithm will deliver to you what I've been working on lately. So stick around and we'll find out exactly how we can make an Against the Storm board game now that I'm confident we've done enough research.